World War II was the most deadliest and devastating war in human history. People from Nazi Germany-occupied territories were sent to Nazi concentration camps. Nazi camps had become a symbol of genocide, terror, and Holocaust. Nazi camp guards are known for their brutality and merciless. Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Bergen-Belsen was a Nazi concentration camp southwest of the town of Bergen, Lower Saxony, Germany. After the outbreak of World War II, the Wehrmacht began using the Bergen-Belsen camp for Allied prisoners of war. Allied prisoners were held for the purpose of exchanging for German prisoners of war. The prisoner of war camp was operational from 1940 to January 1945. In April 1943, the SS Economic Administration Main Office, which administrated the Nazi concentration camp system, converted Bergen-Belsen into a concentration camp. Later, the Wehrmacht handed it over to the SS. They divided into four main parts: prisoners of war camp, prison camp also called men's camp, women's camp, and exchange camp. The SS divided exchange camp into subsections for individual groups. Special camp for Polish Jews. This camp was specially set up to accommodate Polish Jews who held passports from Latin American countries. But they never went, most were sent to the gas chambers in Auschwitz. Star camp. This camp was set up specifically for exchanged Jews, and everyone had to wear a yellow Star of David. Neutral camp. This camp was for people of neutral countries, countries not at war with Germany. Hungarian camp. About 4,000 Hungarian Jews were kept here. Adolf Haas was the first commandant from April 1943 till 2 December 1944. On 2 December 1944, Josef Kramer became the second camp commandant and remained there until 15 April 1945. By 1945, Nazi Germany was losing the war. The Soviet Red Army and Allied forces had advanced on Nazi-held territories. As the Nazis were pushed into retreat, the Nazis were worried that they would be accused of genocide, so they ordered the forced evacuation of concentration camp prisoners in the Eastern Front to camps inside Germany. Thousands of prisoners were forced to walk long distances barefoot in the cold and snow with little or no food, water, or rest, and were then loaded onto trains or boats. Thousands of them died of starvation and exhaustion. SS guards shot those who could not continue the march or who tried to escape. These evacuations were called death marches. In the last weeks of the war, thousands of new prisoners arrived at Bergen-Belsen, as the Nazi Germans continued to evacuate camps that were soon to be liberated by the Allied forces. Belsen camp was originally designed to hold around 10,000 prisoners. In July 1944, there were 7,300. By December 1944, the number had increased to 15,000. 22,000 by February 1945, and by 15 April 1945, the number had increased to 60,000. Conditions inside the Bergen-Belsen were poor. Overcrowding, lack of food, clean water, and poor sanitation caused outbreaks of typhus and other disease. As a result, hundreds of prisoners died every day in the Belsen camp. When the Allied forces advanced on Bergen-Belsen in 1945, a majority of the SS fled the camp. Heinrich Himmler agreed to hand over the camp to Allied forces without a fight. The German army negotiated a truce and exclusion zone around the camp to prevent the spread of typhus. Most of the SS were allowed to leave. Only a small number of SS men and women, including Camp Commandant Kramer, remained to maintain order in the camp. With the collapse of Nazi Germany, the camp administration collapsed, but Kramer remained loyal to the bureaucracy. Kramer told camp personnel that they had to stay on their jobs until the British troops arrived. Before the handover, the SS had managed to destroy the camp's administrative files. On 15 April 1945, the Bergen-Belsen camp was liberated by Allied forces. Allied forces found 60,000 prisoners inside, most of them severely ill and starving, and over 13,000 unburied bodies lying around the camp. They forced the former SS camp staff to help bury thousands of bodies in mass graves. They were not allowed to use gloves or other protective clothing. The corpses were so decomposed that their arms and legs tore away when they were moved. Within 2 months, 17 former SS camp staff died of typhus because they were forced to handle the bodies without protection. Herta Bothe, a former guard at the Belsen camp, recalled in an interview in 1999 that while carrying the corpses, they were not allowed to wear gloves, and she was terrified of contracting typhus. She said that dead bodies were so rotten that the arms and legs tore away when they were moved, and also recalled the emaciated bodies were still heavy enough to cause her considerable back pain. Shortly after liberation, on April 15, 1945, camp prisoners killed about 170 kapos in the satellite camp. The British Army burned down the whole Bergen-Belsen concentration camp to prevent the spread of a typhus epidemic. The British Army set up an emergency hospital nearby. Massive efforts were made to help the survivors with food and medical treatment. The British did their best to help the surviving prisoners of Bergen-Belsen. Despite all their efforts, people in the camp were still dying, and providing food and water to the survivors unfortunately led to more deaths as the survivors could not cope with the food they were given. Most prisoners' digestive systems were too weak to handle such food from prolonged starvation. About 14,000 people died after liberation because they were too sick to recover. The remaining former SS camp personnel were arrested by British and tried at Belsen trial. Camp commandant Josef Kramer, 16 other SS male members, 16 female SS guards, and 12 former kapos were tried by the British in 1945 at the Belsen trial in Lüneburg, Lower Saxony, Germany. Officially called the Trial of Josef Kramer and 44 others. Many of the defendants were charged with crimes committed at Belsen and Auschwitz camps. 11 of the defendants were sentenced to death. 18 were sentenced to prison for periods of 1 to 15 years. However, most of the sentences were reduced on appeals or pleas for clemency. Josef Kramer, aged 39, known as the Beast of Belsen, former Belsen camp commandant. He was found guilty of crimes at both Auschwitz and Belsen camps and sentenced to death. Franz Hössler, aged 39, deputy camp commander. He was found guilty of crimes at Auschwitz and sentenced to death. Fritz Klein, aged 57, Nazi camp doctor. He was found guilty of crimes at both Auschwitz and Belsen and sentenced to death. Peter Weingärtner, aged 32, block leader. He was found guilty of crimes at both Auschwitz and Belsen and sentenced to death. Irma Grese, aged 22, known as the Beautiful Beast. Elisabeth Volkenrath, aged 26. Juana Bormann, aged 52. Nazi female camp guard. Grese and Volkenrath were both found guilty of crimes at both Auschwitz and Belsen. Bormann was found guilty of crimes at Belsen and sentenced to death. Franz Stofel, aged 30, head squad leader. Wilhelm Dörr, aged 24, deputy to Franz Stofel. Ansgar Pichen, aged 32, head of the Belsen camp kitchen. Found guilty of crimes at Belsen and sentenced to death. They were executed by hanging on 13 December 1945 at Hamelin Prison by Albert Pierrepoint. Comment your thoughts on the video. Subscribe the channel and like the video. Thank you for watching.